My name is Carmencita Duna, or Carmen, and I use she, her pronouns. And just a little bit about my background. I'm a settler on the Kwame territory. I've been here for the last 10 years or so. Um, I am a second generation Canadian, born to immigrant parents from Asia. So I would, and I grew up in a small town in BC, and I would say all of those things come together to sort of um, put me on my path of working and be doing what I do now. So I went to school at many moons ago at UVic doing my undergrad, and I also did a diploma here in intercultural education and training. That's what it was called back in the day. Most of my professional life has been in the intercultural field. So I've worked in immigrant and refugee settlement agencies, supporting families and navigate health and education systems in Canada. I worked at Canadian Mental Health Association, providing as a community educator, providing workshops and presentations to newcomers. And I've worked in many areas in the cross-cultural field, but I found myself here working at UVic 8 years ago. I started working at the International Center for Students, where I'm currently the associate director. And I also have my RICIA designation. So that's one of the designations in Canada that allows you to legally provide immigration advice. So I'm an immigration practitioner, and I provide legal advice or support to our students here at UVic in terms of their temporary resident status. So their study permits, work eligibility, co-op work permit, etc. And I'm also able to support their company. So that's a little bit about me. And then I'll just talk briefly about the work that we do at the International Center for Students, so you have that context as well. So the International Center for Students is a centralized resource that provides supports, information, and services to students, undergrad and grad, from pre-arrival to post-graduation. Our mandate is twofold. We support the well-being, intercultural experience, and academic support of students, and also one of our goals is to cultivate an intercultural and inclusive and globally minded campus. We have 3 teams. We do exchange program through our office. We have immigration and settlement advisors. So immigration, I spoke about that. In terms of settlement, we support students around their housing, basically getting settled into Canada, banking, mobile phones, setting up their dependents in schools, etc. And then we have a global community, which supports students with their social cultural transition to Canada. So we have a mentorship program, a conversation partners program, and we host events all throughout the year, hikes, baking, etc. So that's a little bit about me and the work I do. And let's just go into now what we're going to cover for today. So I'm hoping in the time that we have allowed, we actually have
break at 9:20.
Okay.
I'll give you a 10-minute warning.
Yeah, that sounds good.
If you're a little bit late, or we can be a bit flexible.
Sure. That's great. So we'll go over the international education overview. We'll talk about Canada's international education strategy, immigration from the point of view of an international student, the international student experience from Canada, BC, and UVic, and some considerations and challenges in terms of students, families, and systems. And that will actually play nicely into our practical piece, and then implications for the future. So first, I just wanted to start off with a definition, or a couple definitions, of internationalization and post-secondary. Throughout the presentation, you'll see references to internationalization and see how it plays out differently. So we're looking at the first definition here. Intentional processes of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, function, and delivery of post-secondary education in order to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff and make it a meaningful contribution to society. So it's more about cultural exchange and a meaningful contribution. Here's another definition of internationalization. Systemic, sustained effort undertaken by governments aimed at making the higher education system in a certain country more responsive to the requirements and challenges related to the globalization of society's economy and labor markets. So more of the economic and labor market perspective there. So our international student policy in Canada. So it comes in a few different blocks, and we'll look at it through this timeline here. So from 1978 to 1985 is monetizing migrants and differential fees. So in Canada at this time, the international student population was beginning to grow. There's about 15,000 students in post-secondary at this time. And there are a couple of key developments. One being that the notion that international students were wealthy versus prior to this period, international students were thought to need foreign aid, that it was more of an altruistic fee. And also this was also a time to adopt differential tuition fees. So province by province, Ontario being the first, started in 1977 and started charging international students different fees than domestic students. Although there are a lot of protests and from students and staff, at the end of it all, it became common practice. And in 1982, due to severe budget cuts, BC also adopted these.
Sorry, it was Ontario that started first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, what year was that?
It was 1977.
Mm-hmm. And that's just through the realization that they're a profitable resource.
I think budget cuts was we'll get to the profitable resource. We'll get there for sure. And this was also the beginning of policy development. So the next sort of era, from 1985 to 2001, there were more funding cuts, and this is exactly what we're talking about, where it became more intentional, the international student recruitment. It became a priority due to budget cuts, and due to a realization that it could be revenue generating as well. So there was certainly an increase in the advancement of recruitment of international students at this time. And during this time, there were even further budget cuts, so that really spurred it on. In 2001 to 2014, this is really where it becomes almost systemic, where the federal government had policies and strategic plans to support the recruitment of international students. Institutions started partnering with for-profit, not multinational education corporations to recruit, to increase enrollments. And there was a shift in immigration policy at this time too, making it a pathway for international students to gain PR, or permanent residency, and Canadian citizenship. The government of Canada also created what they call EduCanada, which is Canada's brand to support institutions with the recruitment efforts. And at that time as well, there was such an increase in wanting international students to come. This this is every day now, but back then this wasn't common. But recruiters going overseas and actually actively recruiting. So in 2014, there about 80% of PSIs or post-secondary institutions started recruiting overseas, having specialized recruiters, having agents, etc. So, no, please.
Was there a specific places that these people recruited from? Did they have like a strategy or tactics?
Yeah. So at that time,
Because now it feels like international students are very like nationality based or something. Like it feels very like one part of the world specifically.
Yeah.
Was that the case back then as well?
Yeah, I think it was really about having knowing where certain markets for sure. So Chinese market was very popular, as it is still today. As we're seeing now, things are moving a little bit differently. But
So was there like an emphasis on the wealthier? Like was it social?
So at that time, it was very interesting that most international students that were recruiting were definitely of the wealthier type, the international, going to international schools and recruiting.
Because I went to high school in Saudi Arabia and we had recruitment officers come in like 3 times a year. We would tea, McGill, and then go around to classrooms. It was so strange. And this was like in 2011.
Okay, yeah. So during this time.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see like the behind the scenes.
Yeah. That's
what they would wear like such stiff suits. And they would come in with like a counterfeit. So, it was because it was like a private school, so they would specifically come.
Yeah.
And then they would be like 1 to 3 schools in like Riyadh.
Yeah.
And they would choose the schools they would go to. So it was a very strange like recruitment strategy. A certain class of people. Yeah.
And I've found at that time that many of the students could support themselves, like they were coming from
or their families.
Yeah. I really appreciate that comment and just hearing from all the expertise that are and experiences that are in the space. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. In 2001 to 2014, post-secondary was open for business. So there was a lot of federal programs to support that. And then in 2014 to 2020, it was very clear that international students were great for revenue in terms of export. So international education is termed as an export in Canada. It's more valuable than helicopters, airplanes, and aluminum all combined. So it's really about the commodification of education in Canada. In 2012, BC had implemented an education strategy to increase our international students by 50%. And in 2014, the federal government wanted to double their numbers by 2022. So, and they did so by 2017, so 5 years earlier. So there was really a push to recruit international students. And at that same time, there was a call from others who are seeing this to the other side of the coin, maybe it's the same side of the coin, but to support international students and to look at internationalization with more critical eye. So the international education strategy. So this is a strategy that's currently in place, and it is until 2024. So from 2019 to 2024, and it was developed by these 3 federal departments: Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, Global Affairs Canada, Employment and Social Development. And as you see there, international students contribute over $22 billion a year. In BC, it's over $4.7 billion to the economy. The key objectives of this strategy were to encourage Canadian students or domestic students to go abroad, specifically to Asia, to get global experience. Also to diversify the countries that are coming to Canada, of international students coming to Canada. Diversify the countries, diversify the areas of study that they're going to participate in, and areas of Canada where they will have their education. So, as we previously talked about, there were certain areas where students would particularly come from. Those would be China was a big market. India is a big market now, but I think it's really about diversifying that and diversifying. I think lots of students like to come for business and engineering, but the hope was that through this plan that they would go to different disciplines and also study in places that weren't, I think people call it MTV, so Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto. So outside of those metro areas. So we're looking forward to seeing what the new plan will be coming up, and we'll see how it's changed. So in terms of a bit about immigration and just some grounding in terms of immigration for international students. So Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada is a federal department in Canada that's responsible for exactly that, the immigration of refugees and deal with Canadian citizenship. A designated learning institution, so I'll be referring to this a bit, is a school that's approved by the province or territory to accept international students. So in order for an international student to come to Canada, they need to apply for a study permit, and only DLIs or designated learning institutions are able to provide that document to international students, the documentation needed to apply for a study permit. Who needs a study permit and what is it? So a study permit is a permit or is a document that allows a student to study in Canada. A student who is going to be in a program that is 6 months or longer needs to have a study permit and needs to have one in hand before they start their studies. At UVic, we have like I said, immigration practitioners where we work. And not only where I am in the International Center for Students, we also have immigration practitioners at various departments in the institution. The School of Business has immigration practitioners as well as Division of Continuing Studies. And we support students from pre-admission all the way to post-graduation. What we provide is we can support students with their status in Canada, processes and conditions related to their study permits, work permits, and their accompanying family members' documents as well. And we support students navigating IRCC. So in order to get a study permit, students need a letter of acceptance. So they need to apply to UVic and be accepted to UVic. And with that, they will apply online to IRCC. And you'll see here listed some of the documents that are required. So the letter of acceptance, provincial attestation letter, perhaps, proof of financial support. So proof that a student can support themselves for the time that they are in Canada and for their travel back and forth. Recently, the proof of financial support, the requirements were increased. So currently for a year, it's $20,635 for the year. That's approximately $1,720 for living costs per month in Canada. In some areas in Canada, that is doable. In other areas of Canada, that would be quite challenging, particularly with inflation that everyone is seeing. In addition to those documents, they'll need a travel document, so a passport, and like depending on where a student is coming from and what they'll be doing in Canada. For example, if they're going to be working with children, they'll need a medical exam, provide biometrics, and there may be other requirements too, depending on the region. So, for example, in some specific visa offices will require 6-month bank statements. So, depending on where they're applying. So, what happens next is they will receive a decision from IRCC. So, that will either be an approval or refusal. If it's an approval, they'll receive a letter of introduction and an entry document. So, either a visa or an ETA, an electronic travel authorization. And if they're refused, they'll get receive a letter of indicating why they're refused, the reasons why. And then the student will travel to Canada if they've been approved, and will provide the letter of introduction to the border officer, and the student will be issued a study permit at the port of entry. So just some considerations for study permits, just to get a little bit of an idea around the experience of study permits. So the timelines can certainly vary. We see very quick timelines in certain areas and then very slow timelines in others. For example, I think right now Hong Kong is about 5 weeks, whereas students applying from Iran, it's an average of 44 weeks. So students really need to be mindful and plan for that. 44 weeks is a long time to plan ahead for people. There's also, we see that there are trends in approvals and refusals. So unfortunately, as you know, it's not guaranteed for a study permit to be approved. Refusals can and do happen. And here are some common reasons for refusal. So financial. So if, for example, the student can't provide enough proof of financial support, or if the officer can't figure out where the provenance of the funds came from, they may be refused. The purpose of visit. So if the officer doesn't think that the student's coming to Canada to study and they have different intentions, they may be refused. And then ties to Canada versus back home. So one of the conditions of the study permit is that a student who has it on a study permit doesn't overstay and then will return home after their studies. So if an officer thinks that perhaps the student may not return home and overstay, they will potentially be refused. Again, there's also regional considerations. So as I mentioned, processing times can be very different. And also approval and refusal rates can be different. So for example, Japan, Germany, and Korea saw approval rates in the high 90s a couple of years ago. And in China, approval rate of 84%. In contrast to students from Iran who had a 39% approval rate, Pakistan 37%, Nigeria 30%, and Ghana 18% approval rate a couple of years ago. IRCC has admitted flaws in response to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. And I'll just read a couple of quotes here. So IRCC recognizes the presence of racism in Canada and within our own organization. And the government agrees that more can be done with respect to racial bias, discrimination within the organization, and its policies, programs, and operational processing functions. So we see that perhaps playing out in the approvals and their refusals. And it's great that IRCC has acknowledged that. but we'll see what changes and how that changes in the future. So a bit about the international student experience and the expectations of international students, why they want to come to Canada, and some of the challenges that international students face. So the top 3 reasons international students choose Canada are that Canada has a reputation of being a safe and stable country, that we have quality education here, and that we're generally a tolerant and non-discriminatory society. Also, a couple other drivers that why students choose Canada is the opportunities for permanent residence and opportunities to work during their studies and after their studies with a post-graduation work permit. Some of the challenges that international students face, and we'll talk more about this, are the complex and ever-changing immigration policies in Canada right now. For those of you who are here or not here, immigration and international students are in the headlines a lot lately. There's a lot of immigration policy changes that have happened in the last number of months and really the last year or two. It's also challenging for students to maintain their and keep up with all the administrative procedures related to their immigration status, their health insurance, etc. And then, as expected, the transition to a new environment and culture can be challenging. Post-arrival, so some of the considerations around here. So international students need to maintain their study permit conditions when they're here. So some students need to make progress in their program of study. They need to maintain a valid status in Canada. They need to apply for extension if their study permit will expire before they complete their program. So there are many things that international students need to balance, and many students want to work on or off campus while they're in Canada, and in order to do so, they need to maintain full-time status, which can be very challenging when a student is transitioning and just learning the ins and outs of living in Canada. And one of the reasons why many students come to Canada and or particularly UVic is the opportunity to have experiential learning. So that's working while you're studying within your studies, within your academic program. So work integrated learning is a big part. So in order for international students to participate in these opportunities, they'll still need a work permit. So they'll need to apply for additional documentation for that. So there are many things that international students have to navigate. And again, one of the drivers that why international students come is to be able to work after and stay. So the post-graduation work permit is an opportunity to do that. It's up to potentially 3-year work permit for students. So in terms of the Canadian context, why students come to Canada is that higher education in Canada tends to be more affordable than similar countries that offer international education, for example, the UK. The average cost for an undergrad per year tuition is $20,000 to $40,000 in Canada. And you'll see here that in 2022, there were over 800,000 students studying in Canada at all levels of study, and that was a 31% increase from 2021 to 2022. And you'll see the exponential growth there over the last 5 years of nearly 43%, and in a decade, 170%. And you'll see here the top sending countries are the Philippines with growth and growth from Hong Kong, Nigeria, Colombia, and India. And here's just a graph of, or a chart of the top 15 sending countries to Canada and by year. And you'll see that India is quite large now in terms of sending students to Canada, with a 47% change. China a bit down, Philippines up, and et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see here the difference between college and university, that India is highest for both college and university, whereas there are definitely differences in source countries or sending countries for university and college. China, you'll see there there's quite a distinct difference from the university to college. And in BC specifically, India, China, again, highest. And then UVic specifically, so just like in Canada and China and India, are the US and Iran and Vietnam are our top, and have been for a number of years, changing a bit in the order, but those have been our top 5 for many years now. And then in terms of enrollment, these numbers are from 2022 to 2020. We're still waiting for official numbers for more recent numbers, but here we have about 22,000 students total at UVic, and 3,500 of those are international students from over 100 countries. Okay, great. Yeah. So for post-degree plans, as I mentioned, around 73% of students hope to apply for the post-graduation work permit, and 60% of students plan to apply for PR and hope to stay in Canada longer. In terms of BC ranks second in proportion to all of Canada, and how in terms of international students wanting to stay in the province, 21% of students transition to PR, and results find that work experience, that's study-related work experience, increases the likelihood of staying. And here are some of the barriers and challenges, and we'll talk more about these in our practical piece. So immigration status, settlement challenges, financial, academic, language, loneliness and isolation, maintaining physical, emotional, mental health, cultural and social justice, racism and discrimination, and as we talked about, the work opportunities, so the challenges of maintaining full-time in order and balancing work and school. So we often, I have the love diagram of Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. Just as we know, students' basic needs need to be met in order for them to thrive. So and for international students, even finding housing, etc., is challenging. So finding those when meeting those basic needs. So as I mentioned, in Canada, international students have been in the media quite a bit, and here are some of the major news outlets in Canada and some of the headlines that we see here around unsavory agents duping students, students having challenges with supporting themselves, having to go to food banks to support themselves, and really struggling students, and students really struggling. So and showing here the host of problems that the international student boom has has created. So in response to that, the federal government has made a number of changes this past year. So some of those you may have heard of or not, but in October, this past October, the government has introduced saying that they're going to have a recognized institution framework. So mandating that DLIs or designated learning institutions support their international students, like provide housing or provide supports for housing, provide supports for health and mental health, which is great because I think it's important that as we welcome international students here, that there are supports in place for them. In 2023, in December, they implemented a verification process, so verifying students that their letter of acceptance provided by the institution is not fraudulent. So I think that was spurred on by those admission letters that were fraudulent. Increased in January 2024. IRCC imposed caps of study permit applications. So really starting to limit the growth of international students in Canada. And more recently, the BC government has announced that they are making changes to their BC provincial nominee program and sort of scaling that back as well. So there are a number of things happening in the international education front, changes to international education here. And it certainly impacts our students. Seeing headlines like this, many students are feeling unwelcome or uncertain about their future in Canada. So certainly there have been certain impacts. And then implications for the future, possibilities. So I think that the international education, as I referred to, has been a lot about commodification and revenue building for institutions. But I think there's also an opportunity and a need for us to focus more on the respect and the cultural linguistic diversity, the mutual learning, the need to support the future of our country and to give opportunities for people around the world. So that's it. I was just wondering if anybody had any questions.
Yes, I have. Thank you. I don't know if it's my turn to speak.
Yeah, Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It's really interesting. I was wondering if you can tell us maybe a little bit more about how UVic is responding to these changes in policy that are also happening like kind of fast. So my sense is that students kind of plan to study abroad for a very long time, and then maybe they're applying for a permit, waiting for it, and then like IRCC is making these changes where like maybe you won't be able to get a postgraduate permit anymore. So I'm just curious about how a university responds to quick policy changes that might impact both existing students and also newcomers.
That's a great question, Maria. And we'll use the post-graduation work permit as an example. So the IRCC has indicated that there may be upcoming changes to the post-graduation work permit and connecting that to labor market needs. So one of the things that we do at UVic, we are part of the Canadian Bureau for International Education. So really advocating for students, for IRCC to give us as much warning as possible, and to consult with us as much as possible, so we can talk about the impacts that has on students and their families. not only students here, but also students who are planning to come here, and impacts to Canada's reputation are as a welcoming country. I think, just that sort of messaging. I will say that there has been a lot of advocacy in terms of grandfathering students who are already studying in Canada, so that their plans are not disrupted, that they can apply for and be approved for the post-graduation work permit. I am in calls probably weekly about that, just because it's such an important piece of why students come here, and also it's what they were promised when students came, and that's also that's very similar to BCPNP, the changes that have happened there. We've done a lot of advocacy there as well. In terms of BCPNP, connecting with our colleagues at UBC, SFU, and making sure that and the research colleges the research universities make sure that we have the same message, that the impact of these changes on students is huge, and they really need to be thinking that through. Did that answer your question, Maria?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have been trying to follow the debates because my research, half of it is on international. Yeah. So I don't know if I can ask another question unless someone has questions.
Go ahead. There's no questions in the chat. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was also wondering about your perspective, and you showed some data, and it was also in the report, in the differences between international students that come for colleges and then those that come for universities, and kind of like the outcomes. And is that something that are like research universities are partnering with colleges, or it's mostly like we have these priorities, so we work with SFU and UBC, as you mentioned, versus the college system, and kind of like the differences in this broad policy out international students, but then like the more practical implications for the different kinds of institutions.
Yeah, I think things, because of the changes that IRCC has made just recently, in terms of, again, the post-graduation work permit not being available to as many programs on the college level. I think there's more interest in colleges and universities partnering together to support international students. And we're starting to see that more, which is great, because I think the more advocacy, the better. But you're correct in that the aims of students going to colleges has been different than the aims of students going to universities. But yeah, we'll see how the impacts of these changes to potentially the PGWP will support that sort of working together, that collaboration.